very warm welcome to our workshop. My name is John and I will be your host. The topic for our discussion is I create my own reality. And I find it quite interesting when I make the statement to see how different people react. Somebody said to me once, how can you say that to me? Are you telling me that I'm to blame for all the bad things that have happened in my life? Somebody else said to me, quite an interesting concept. I've never thought about that. So that sort of gives you an indication of where people are at in how they respond to this particular statement. And unfortunately, and I was one of them who experiences for most of my life, there are so many people who live in a place or in a state of life happening to them, where they feel out of control, they feel victimized sometimes, they feel life is unfair, and really feel helpless and hopeless to a large extent. And as I said, I can relate to that because that's where I lived for most of my life, in my adult life, until I started to learn about this whole concept that I create my own reality. And initially, I also struggled with the concept. I really battled to get my head around the whole idea, because I was raised with the understanding that life happened to me and I've got no control. So I want us to look at the whole concept of what it really means that we create our own reality and the freedom that we can actually experience when we understand understand this principle. First of all, what is reality? When we make the statement, I create my own reality, what is reality? Well, we're going to look at sort of the general definitions that explain what reality is. The first one, reality is the world or the state of things as they actually exist, as opposed to an idealistic or notional idea of them. In other words, the way things are, what you see, the way it is what it is, the actual tangible, physical, observable reality, as opposed to my idea, my explanation, my understanding of something. And the second one, reality is the state or quality of having existence or substance. In other words, something has a physical reality. As I said, you can observe it, you can taste it, you can touch it, you can experience it. It is what it is. Is reality absolute? Is reality definite? Is reality really what we think it is? And of course, the whole statement, I create my own reality, doesn't necessarily mean the physical, tangible, observable things that come into my life that I directly caused that or I directly created it. The topic, interestingly enough, I just want to point it out, is not I create reality. The topic is I create my reality. We're going to look at what the difference is between the two. So is reality absolute? There are two kinds of reality. One is objective, what I observe, what is tangible, what is measurable, and subjective, how I experience it. And there's a big difference between the two. As I said, I'm not necessarily responsible for every physical, tangible thing, measurable thing that is in my life, but I am directly responsible for my subjective reality, how I experience it. Now, if we just, from a daily practical application point of view, look at reality, something is real to me because I experience it. If I don't experience something, to me, it is not real, if it makes sense. It is my understanding, my perception that I create that causes me to experience whatever it is. So subjective reality is how I experience any situation, any event, any circumstance, and I directly create that experience. I do not experience reality the way it is. Now, I know that may sound strange, but we're going to look at the science behind it. We're going to look at how the brain and the mind works to support the statement. I do not, and I actually want to take it a step further, I cannot experience reality, physicality, situations, circumstances exactly the way they are or the way it is. I can only experience my perception of what is. There is a certain process that takes place within me that creates my experience. So this whole idea sort of implies that reality is not real. If what I see, what I can touch, what I can measure, objective reality, I am unable to experience that as it is. I can only experience subjective reality, the process that I go through, and we're going to look at some of those processes that I create my experience, is all that I can experience. That means reality is not real. In other words, what we think is real at the end of the day is not really real. And I know there's a bit of a brain teaser, we're playing some mind games, but it will become clearer as we move along. What is and what I experience is not necessarily the same thing. I just want to warn you, I may be repeating certain things, not because of poor memory, but it's important that we understand certain concepts and we develop a better understanding of concepts when we hear them over and over, because it helps the brain to make some sense of certain things. So I'm going to repeat this again. The physical, measurable, observable reality, the objective reality, and that which I experience, subjective reality, is not the same thing. And I'm sure many of us have experienced or observed that two people may observe the same event or go through the same situation and come out with very different experiences, with very different descriptions or explanations. So what is real, objective, and what is real, subjective, what is experienced, is not the same thing. Let's look at how that works. Your perception creates your reality. What do I mean by perception? The 5 senses that I use to process information from the outside world. What I see, what I hear, what I feel, what I smell, what I touch, are my perceptions that create my reality. And now that I've potentially confused you completely, let's look at some explanations that will start to clarify what I'm saying. First of all, let's look at some principles, some points to ponder. It's just some principles I just want to point out that will sort of help us to start to get a head around how this whole concept of I create my own reality actually works. There is only one reality, and that is my reality. It sounds so narcissistic, but let's look at it from a practical point of view. I cannot experience directly what somebody else is experiencing. You cannot experience directly what I'm experiencing. As I said, two people may be faced with exactly the same situations and have two very different interpretations. So therefore, if reality is subjective, that which I experience, that means there's only one reality. I can only experience my reality. And there are very specific reasons why I am experiencing my reality the way that I am actually experiencing it. The next point, I cannot experience reality directly as it is, as I intimated in the first slide. There is a whole process that I have to go through before it creates the experience of whatever reality it is that I'm facing. The third point, I create my own reality. I create that experience. And what that implies is that no situation, no circumstance, no event, no person can make me experience anything directly. Take it a step further. Nobody can make me happy. Nobody can make me sad. Nobody can make me angry. And I remember when I first heard this, everything inside of me rebelled because, as I said, I grew up to be a victim and to blame. But if I create my own reality through various processes that take place within me, what really happens is, for example, somebody may say and do something, and there's a process that takes place within me, and I then create my experience of whatever it is that the person said or did. How does that work? Just an interesting comment that I came across. Reality leaves a lot to the imagination by John Lennon. Now, imagination, my way of thinking, the mental processes. So reality leaves a lot to imagination. And what I understand that means is that my imagination determines my reality, or reality depends on my imagination, my thinking, my emotions, my story, to cause it to become my experience. And the simplest way that I was able to get my head around this was the story that I tell myself about a situation will determine how I experience that situation. Now, let me just put it into context. By no means am I saying that if somebody treats me badly or if somebody is unkind to me, that it is all me. Absolutely not. I don't take responsibility for what the person does. I don't take responsibility for why they do it. What I do take responsibility for is how I experience that, because I directly and single-handedly created the experience of whatever it is the person may have said or done. There is a law and a principle called cause and effect. Now, I just want to bring this law of cause and effect into the equation to help create a better understanding of this principle that I create my own reality. Everything in my reality, and we've determined by now, by this I mean my subjective reality, that which I experience, is an outcome or a result, in other words, an effect of something that preceded it, a cause. Something happened and it led to a certain result. And that result is the effect that was created by a cause. And we're going to look at some practical examples. Well, let's look at one now. Somebody says something very unkind to me, insults me, tells me that I am stupid, I am useless, I'm worthless. That was a cause. Something happened. The effect may be that I feel angry, I feel embarrassed, I feel hurt. That's the effect. The reason why I feel the way that I do, or the effect, or the outcomes, or the result, is because there was something that created that effect. There was a cause. Now, what we're going to look at in this whole discussion that I create my reality is the fact that the actual circumstance or the actual situation or the person is not really the major cause, or what is known as first cause. That was a stimulus, that was a trigger, but then there was a process that was created inside of me, and that is the actual cause that created a result or an outcomes or an effect. Another point that I want to bring out is my focus creates more. More of what? More of what I'm focusing on. If I focus on my problems, I will experience and create, or create and experience more of my problems. If I focus on my inabilities, I will create and experience more of my inabilities. And that is just a law of cause and effect. That's just how it works. I've experienced it over and over in my own life. If I shifted focus onto my abilities, the potential for me to learn how to deal with things, I will create and experience more of that. So the law of cause and effect really indirectly states, whatever I focus on, I will create, because the focus is the cause. What I create is the effect. I can live at effect. In other words, I can continue to focus on the results, the outcomes, if they're negative, and I can continue to complain about them. I can continue to blame circumstances, situations, or people. And what will be the outcomes or the result? I will live as a victim. Or I can live at cause. I can start to think towards solutions. I can start to think, what can I do differently in this situation? Simply meaning I can start to create causes, and I will then move from being a victim to be a creator. Now, these are all very nice words and they sound great, but personally, I don't really care about words. I want to understand how things work. I want to understand how the principles work, how I can implement these particular principles to create whatever it is that I desire. All perception is the result of internal meaning making and feeling making processes that create the internal experience created by me through various filters in the mind. What does it mean in simple English? Whatever I perceive through my five senses, so whatever the situation is, whatever the event is, whatever the circumstance is, whatever it is that somebody may be saying or doing, I perceive that. And that perception comes about because there are meaning-making processes that take place in my mind. I tell myself a story about objective reality. I tell myself a story about the situation that I'm observing. That story that I tell myself creates emotions and feelings within me. And the meaning-making process plus the feeling-making process equal my experience. And that is created internally. So that implies that it is not the external situation that is directly responsible for my experience, but it's the internal processes that are directly responsible for my experience. And these processes take place through various filters in my mind that determine why I give the situation the meaning that I do. Why am I telling myself the kind of story that I'm telling myself? And why is it that I experience the situation the way that I do? I want to show you and explain a model to you called perception is projection that really explains the science and the psychology behind how we create our own experience through the meaning that we give situations and the feeling that is created by the meaning-making process and how we experience that. And ultimately, obviously, the ideal would be, how can I go about creating different experiences if I have come to the realization that my perception and the experiences that I've created through my perception don't really serve me? What is a better way of going about the whole process? I'm going to explain this whole process with a story of a client that I had a number of years ago, and I've got his permission to use the story. And let's call him Chris. Chris came to me after having experienced, I think it was 4 or 5 broken relationships in 1 year. And at that stage, his explanation was that he hadn't met the right partner yet, and he hasn't met the perfect person. And he externalized or projected all the reasons why he was experiencing what he was experiencing. And then somebody pointed out to him, you know what, there is one common denominator in this whole situation. And he also started to realize that this had been a pattern for many years with regards to relationships. And he started to consider the fact that maybe he needs to take some level of responsibility and explore if there is something that he is doing that is contributing towards creating the situation. So I said to him, okay, tell me about the last situation. What happened with the last breakup? So we're going to start off on the right-hand side, the external event and the information. And he said, well, as the pattern is, he met this person and he thought finally he met the ideal partner. The relationship developed, became seriously pretty quick, and they moved in together after something like 2 months. And one morning they were getting ready for work and he put on a green shirt. And Susan said to him, the way he interpreted, Susan told him to wear his blue shirt. And when Susan told him to wear his blue shirt, that was the external event, the communication. Susan telling him to wear his blue shirt after he had already put on the green shirt. And he started to feel a sensation on the inside of him. He started to feel some anxiety. He started to feel uneasiness. And now in hindsight, talking about it, he realized that that had been a pattern throughout most, if not all, of his relationships. Something would happen and it would create a negative emotion inside of him. So according to this process of perception is projection, and by the way, perception, the way that I see a situation, the way that I process the information, is what I project onto the situation. That is the meaning that I give the situation. And how it happens is there is the internal events, in this case, Susan telling Chris to wear a blue shirt. This process, or this information rather, goes through a process called the reticular activation system. And this is a process that is the result of psychological internal filters that we all develop basically from the time we were born throughout our lives. And these filters distort, generalize, and delete some of the information that we take in during this event. And one of the reasons being that there is such a huge amount of potential information available. And the brain finds it very difficult to process all this information, so it becomes selective with regards to the information that it processes and how it processes it. So it distorts some of the information. We perceive something different from the way it is. We generalize, never, always, never, everyone, no one syndrome. And we even delete some of the information that is not relevant at that particular stage as far as our psychological filters are concerned. And we're going to look at how Chris distorted and generalized and deleted the information coming in from that event that morning while they were getting ready for work. What causes these filters? Well, time, space, where I am now, where I was at different times, at different experiences throughout my life. Memories that I internalized, either similar to this particular external event or related over many years. And of course, what causes or what creates a memory is the event plus the emotion that I experienced at the time. The decisions that were made throughout my life, and very often with regards to events that we go through earlier in life, and we will look at some of the decisions that Chris had made because of experiences that he'd had. The values and the beliefs that we internalize throughout our lives. Beliefs, what is important to us, values, that which is important to us, and beliefs particularly about ourselves, about the world, about life, and about people. The language that we describe to explain the external situation, our inherent traits, our predispositions, our tendencies. Are we inclined towards positivity? Are we inclined towards negativity? The attitudes that we've developed, the way that we see things, the way that we look at things. And of course, all those particular factors are the result of our nurturing, the way we were brought up, and then our nature, what inherently we're already part of our psychology or our personality. Now, let's look at how Chris processed all of this. He put on his green shirt. Susan told him to wear a blue shirt. He processed the information. These factors were triggered inside of him, and he now developed what is referred to as an internal representation or a story in his head about what happened. So the external event goes through this distortion, generalization, deletion process and creates the internal event or the story, my way of thinking about the situation. There is a process that takes place within our nervous system, in that our nervous system releases chemicals or responds biochemically to what goes on in our minds. So my story about a situation causes a chemical reaction from the nervous system. So say, for example, if I tell myself a negative story about something that happened, I process the information as being negative. My nervous system will release, secrete stress hormones, and those stress hormones will make me feel according to the story. So I will feel the pain, I will feel the anger, I will feel the anxiety, for example, that are included or that are part of my internal representation, the language that I use, the story that I'm telling myself. My physiology responds by releasing these chemicals, and that creates my state, how I feel. Do I feel strong? Do I feel weak? Do I feel overwhelmed? Do I feel courageous? So the emotion is associated with the story that I'm telling myself, the internal representation, the way that I'm thinking. That internal emotion causes the nervous system to respond biochemically, and that creates my state. And by the way, it could also be positive. If I give a situation positive, meaning exactly the same situation, there's still the distortion, generalization, deletion process that take place. There's an internal presentation, and it's the quality of the story, positive or negative, that will determine the quality of the emotions, positive or negative, that will determine the quality of the chemicals, positive or negative, that will determine the quality of my state, positive or negative. And that ultimately leads to my behavior or my reaction. So we all know Chris's side of the story. He agreed for me to speak to Susan because they were hoping to patch things up, because they were really in love. They really cared deeply for each other. So I had an opportunity to speak to Susan. I said, Susan, tell me what happened the day that you broke up. And she said, well, I'm quite baffled. And he couldn't really explain to me what happened, why he reacted the way he did. So I said to her, well, tell me what happened. Well, Chris put on his green shirt, and I then reminded him of the blue shirt that I bought him for his birthday a few days earlier. And the reason why I was so drawn to this blue shirt when I saw it is because it reminded me of his blue eyes. It really matches his blue eyes. And blue really makes him feel good. So I just suggested that he wears the blue shirt because it matches his blue eyes. And he reacted. And I was quite baffled by this. And he was really, really intense in his reaction. And the more I tried to ask him and question him why he was so upset, the more frustrated he became. And what do you think Chris said? You didn't say anything about my blue eyes. What do you think Susan said? I did. And how often do we experience this kind of scenario? You said you didn't, I didn't, you did. Why? Because the filters that we created, the psychological filters based on all the experiences, the memories, the decisions, the beliefs that we internalized from the time we were born, that all determine, the filters determine the process of distortion, generalization, and deletion. So let's look at deletion first. Chris's filters would not allow him to hear the fact that in this interaction, Susan was complimenting his blue eyes and suggesting that he wears the blue shirt. So it was a whole complimenting process taking place. And his brain deleted the compliment, deleted some of the words. He had no memory of her even mentioning his blue eyes. It generalized the experience. Again, all women tell you what to do. Women are bossy. It distorted the compliment into being controlled. And he was as baffled as what she was when he realized and heard what had happened. So they asked me, how does it happen? Well, the truth is, throughout our lives, we all experience significant emotional events where we experience intense emotions, and as a result of those events, we make unconscious decisions and we develop unconscious beliefs. So in a subsequent session, I said to Chris, do you have any memories of any painful situations with regards to relationships? And he said to me, I've got vague memories when I was about 5 or 6 of mom and dad having arguments before they got divorced. And when he mentioned that, he actually became quite emotional because he realized that he had really suppressed those memories to a large extent and he hadn't really thought much about it. But he started to remember hearing mom and dad fighting and mom being very domineering and aggressive towards dad and dad not really saying anything in response. And what he does remember, every now and again, dad would leave the house and he would stay away for a couple of hours and come back. So things started to make sense, that Chris started to realize that he had these significant emotional events that took place. He had these painful memories. And when we started to, through some therapeutic processes, explore how he internalized this whole event or series of events, he started to realize that he had formed subconscious beliefs about relationships. Relationships are painful. He developed subconscious beliefs about women. Women are domineering. He then made unconscious decisions. I will never get involved in relationships. Why? Because relationships are painful. Remember, these are all unconscious. They take place at a subconscious level, and this whole process took place during a time where he was very young. Chris is very young. His brain was underdeveloped. He was not able to make logical sense of what is happening, in the sense that mom and dad are having problems. He internalized a lot of responsibility. Maybe he's causing the problems. If only there was something he could do. Can you see this whole situation, how negative his internalization was? So now a woman tells him to wear a blue shirt, bringing back the memories of mom telling dad what to do, but in an aggressive way, and dad retaliating and them having arguments. And the distortion, generalization, deletion process, because Chris really had unresolved trauma from childhood that was triggered by Susan's interaction without her even realizing what was happening. And he internalized the situation very different from the way that it actually was. So what was his internal representation? What was his stories? Oh my God, it's happening again. Another woman telling me what to do. Why do I keep choosing this woman? Why do I keep getting involved in painful relationships? And that internal representation caused his physiology to respond biochemically, and he experienced huge amounts of stress, anxiety, and that put him into a negative, emotional, unresourceful state of anxiety. And what is important when we are in a negative state with negative emotions, it literally affects our cognitive ability, our ability to think clearly, to be logical about the situation, to make the right decisions. And what happened was, whatever was internalized in Chris became triggered. And what was his behavior? He tried to get out of the situation, tried to get out of the relationship. Why? Because the internalization of the belief and the decision was triggered, and his subconscious mind would now cause him to behave in ways that would save him from the pain of the relationship. And somebody asked me, well, if we form these beliefs and we make these decisions, why do we behave contrary to those? And as I said earlier on, because they are unconscious, we're not consciously aware of them. So very often we behave in ways, we set certain goals, we want to achieve certain things in life. However, our internal processing or internal programming very often is in opposition to what it is that we want to achieve. So how does perception is projection come into play in the situation between Chris and Susan? Chris perceived Susan as another domineering, controlling woman. He projected it onto her, and this whole process played out. And when he realized what was going on, he said to me, wow, so what you are telling me is that I have created this reality with regards to relationships all my life. I want to take it a step further, how we create our reality, not only with regards to situations and experiences. Even our sensory perception is a creation that happens inside of us. I'm going to focus particularly on sight and sound. Sight is a perception of an image file in the brain. You are looking at this presentation right now. You may be even looking at my picture in the video clip. I'm telling you that you are not seeing any picture. You are not experiencing this image that you are looking at. You are experiencing an image file that was created in your brain. Light causes whatever that you are looking at to be reflected into the eye. And that reflection goes through various processes, electrical, chemical processes in the eye and in the brain. And it literally creates an image file, and you are looking at the image file or the video file created in your brain. And this process takes place within a split second. So literally you created whatever it is that you are observing in your brain. Same with sound. You are listening to my voice. No, you're not hearing my voice. You are literally listening to a sound file that was created in your brain. And by the way, I don't have a voice. There is no sound emanating from me. There's air coming through via my vocal cords. My vocal cords cause vibration. That causes vibration of air pockets in the air. And via this technology, which I can't quite explain because I'm not au fait with technology in this regard, but this whole process causes the vibration of air pockets to hit my ear, and my ear and all the various structures within my ear, again through chemical and electrical processes, create a sound file, and I am listening to the sound file. So literally we live in our heads. We experience everything in our heads. So we process whatever events, situations, circumstances are external to us. Our perception is a direct creation by us. The reality of what we experience is a direct creation by us. What we see, what we hear, what we taste, what we feel, what we smell are all processes that are created on the inside of us. And we experience that on the inside of us, purely creations that we brought about by ourselves. It goes a step further. I even create my own emotions. Oh, no, that's not true. When somebody insults me, they hurt my feelings. No, it's not possible. They can't hurt my feelings. They can only say or do something that I tell myself a story about. That story that I'm telling myself causes my nervous system to respond biochemically. That causes my experience of the situations. I create those emotions. Emotions are simply a physical, biochemical response to my thoughts. I apologize for the double M. Are simply a biochemical response to my thoughts. Therefore, I created the emotions. Therefore, I create my own reality as I create my own perception. The meaning-making process, the story that I'm telling myself, as a result of my psychological filters, the memories, the emotions that are triggered, the values, the meaning, all the various processes that I've internalized throughout my life that are triggered, that cause these psychological filters, that cause for me to create my perceptions. I created all of that. So therefore, I create my own experience. Therefore, I am able to create a different reality when I change my perception. I may not be able to change the physical, objective reality that I observe. However, quantum physics seems to tell us a different story, but we don't have time to go into that. So we will purely stay with subjective reality or my experience. If I created my experience of a current situation, and I am not happy with my experience, I can create a different experience. Or if I am not happy with the effects of various causes, I can create new causes and I can create new effects. What is the first cause? What is the main cause? My perception, the way I look at things, the stories that I tell myself. It is time for change. and that time is now. I can find a way to create a different reality so that I can create different experiences. Cause and effect at work. How does it work practically? So I'm going to go through this process step by step. My thoughts create my emotions. Remember, my thoughts are in response to what it is that I observe, the story that I'm telling myself, and the meaning-making process, in other words, and the feeling-making process, the emotions that I now feel. My emotions create the chemicals in my body that create the actual feelings. The emotions are attached to the thought. So if I have an angry thought, I'm thinking angry thoughts, the emotion is anger. And that causes the chemical reaction in my body, and I feel the anger. So my emotions create chemicals in my body that causes the feelings. These chemicals and these feelings impact my homeostasis. Homeostasis is the balance or the equilibrium within the various processes in my body, in my brain, the biochemical and electromagnetic processes that ultimately determine how my body functions. If there's equilibrium, my body functions in a healthy manner. When there's a disturbance in homeostasis, or there's a disturbance in the equilibrium, there's a disturbance in the chemical processes and the bioelectrical processes, there is a disturbance in my bodily function. That can affect my physical health. It can affect my mental health. Homeostasis directly impact my body and my brain, and as I said, can have a direct impact on my physical and mental functioning, my physical and mental health. But it goes a step further. All of the above can impact me at a DNA or genetic level. They use two terms when it comes to genetics. You can upregulate genes or it can downregulate genes. So if I am stuck in negative stories, if I am inclined to focusing more on negative, if my story is inclined to be negative, I am going to create negative emotions and feelings within my body. That's going to have an impact on my homeostasis. That's going to have an impact on the function within my brain and my body. That could have an impact on my genes. So I can either cause my DNA to serve me, or I can cause my DNA to harm me. And there's a whole long process there, which we don't have time to go into. But just the fact that I even play a role in how my body functions, the disease or illnesses that very often I may develop in my body, I play a role in how all that comes about. And it all starts with my thinking. So where do I start to create what it is that I want? Where do I start to change my reality? Where do I start to create a better experience for myself? Change starts with personal responsibility. As long as I blame, as long as I project, as long as I give my power away, I will keep creating the same effects over and over again. Personal responsibility and blame are two opposing concepts. Personal responsibility tells me, let me look at what am I doing? What am I thinking? What are the stories I'm telling myself? What are the meanings that I'm giving to situations? How can I own what is in my life at this stage? I may not be responsible for the things that came into my life, but the fact that things are in my life at the moment, that is my responsibility. When I change my thinking, I change my life, I change my experience. When I change my story, I change the outcome through all the processes that we've mentioned. The moment you accept responsibility for everything in your life is the moment you gain the power to change anything in your life. And that is so freeing. Now, there's a warning with this. It takes a while to it took me a while, let me rather speak about myself. It took me a while to get my head around this whole concept. Although logically I understood, logically it made sense, but I had been so ingrained with patterns and conditioning and beliefs that made me a victim all my life that it was very difficult. My subconscious mind initially resisted this new information. But when I started to play around with the idea, and for years I kept reminding myself, I create my own reality. I create how I'm experiencing situations. If I created that reality, I can create new realities. I can create new causes that will create new effects. And I wish I had time to share some of the amazing changes in my life and miracles that I've experienced in my life. When I was able to move from being a victim and life happening to me to becoming a creator and creating the reality that I'm experiencing in my life right now, and the continued opportunity to create more and more, because life very often holds surprises for us, things to happen that we may not have any direct control over. But if I can begin to understand that the way that I experience is directly my responsibility and my creation, it is amazing to start to work towards taking more personal responsibility and learning the principles of how I can create a new experience. Well, that is the end of our workshop. I hope you were able to relate to some of the concepts or some of the principles. If you would like to learn more about online coaching, or just got some questions about tonight's topic, please feel free to drop me a line at john.ttklife@gmail.com. For those who participate in these workshops, I offer a free half-an-hour session for any questions or any concerns. And if you feel there's a match, you're welcome maybe to consider ongoing coaching, online coaching, where you can work on some of these principles that will enable you to create the life that you deserve. Thank you for spending this time with me, and I really wish you an amazing journey forward as you continue creating the life you deserve. All the best.